Manchester United won. 3 Brighton and Hove Albion. Good Lord. What on earth happened there? Well, I'm here today with Jon Mackenzie to find out. Hi, Jon.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good, okay, fine. Now listen, Manchester United, they've gone and lost another game of football, haven't they? They do love to do that. But in this game, they did it in a bit of a different way. That's very rude, than they have done before. Now, the temptation is looking at their formation here, a diamond formation, that it might be because they don't have any right wingers currently playing football for them, apart from Palestri. But you think it might be more specific to Brighton?
Yeah, well, when it comes to Brighton...
Hey, they got a diamond here. You got a jewellery store? Why did they do that? That's what I'm asking about.
You'll often see teams changing up their approach to face them, and that is because Brighton are so good at their first few phases of build-up. We know that they have this really nice box shape with their 2 centre-backs, their 2 centre midfielders as a pivot, and whatever oppositions seem to try and do to stop them from moving the ball through the middle and then getting the ball into their forwards, it appears very, very hard to stop it. And so I've got a screenshot here which shows how Manchester United tried to stop that square of players being able to progress the ball last season. So what we've got here is we've got Bruno Fernandes and we've got Fred, and what they're doing is they're sitting on the 2 centre midfielders to stop them from getting the ball. If you can do that, then they won't be able to progress the ball through the middle. Then you have one striker here who's moving between the 2 centre-backs. And that's the way that they did it last season. This season they did it slightly different. So we've got a screenshot here. This is from the game of the weekend. And
they've inverted the pyramid.
They've inverted the pyramid. Well,
someone's finally done it.
Inverted the pyramid.
Someone called Jonathan Wilson.
Yeah, it's right here. Here's the evidence. So what they've got is now 2 forwards who are going to be moving in the lines between the centre midfielder and the centre back. And then we've got a centre midfielder in Bruno Fernandes, who's the tip of the diamond. He's going to move between the 2 centre midfielders depending on who is going to press forward. So if we take a look at the board, then what we've got here is this situation where what Manchester United are trying to do is close the passing lanes between the centre backs and the centre midfielders and cause various problems in the build-up. So let's imagine that Lewis Dunk has the ball passed to him by Jason Steele. Hoyland is going to step up here, and that's going to force the ball back across to Paul van Hecke on the other side.
Let me help you. The drop shadow.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So as Joe has pointed out, by pushing forward, Hoyland is closing the passing lane into Dahoud behind him. The ball then is going to get passed across to Paul van Hecke, and at that point, Rashford is going to make a curving run in here. Fernandes is going to come across to Gross to make sure that ball can't get passed through to him. And then we have the midfield behind, so we have Casemiro, McTominay, and Eriksen. Eriksen's going to step up on Veltman. Reguilon's going to step up on the wide player. The centre-backs are going to step up and...
Oh, Dallow's got his own shadow.
He's having a look down the field, seeing what's going on, and as a result, he decides he's going to step up on Mitoma.
I like when they look before they go.
Yeah. Well, it's good to do that. So in this situation, actually, what Manchester United are able to do is cause problems for Brighton because they're not able to move from what we call this first phase, which is unsettled possession, because they aren't comfortably on the ball. They have to worry about opposition players stepping up to them. They don't have the ball under control. And Manchester United are actually able to cause them all these sorts of problems.
I think it's fair to say Manchester United, they had a good first 20 minutes of the game. And it looked, to all viewers as though perhaps they can go out and win this one. Brighton scored, I think, against the run of play. They did so fairly easily, though, when they did. And I think it was from their first chance. But after that, the game just completely changed, didn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a few things we can talk about here. So we've talked about how Manchester United were good at causing problems for Brighton when they were in unsettled possession. The goal actually comes from a moment when Brighton are in settled possession.
I think you just called them McBrighton.
McBrighton.
Do you like to apply your own little bit? Mackenzie, McBrighton?
McBrighton.
McCheese?
So as you can see, in this situation, Brighton are in a period of settled possession, so they've got the ball, they're comfortable, there's not an immediate threat on the ball for them to worry about. And as we can see, there's a couple of things to notice here. The first one is that these 2 central midfielders are actually keeping the front line of Manchester United really narrow. Because again, the worry is that what Manchester United are clearly doing is blocking out the middle. You can see all of these players here. So these 2 centre midfielders are actually pinning the front line, which makes very, very narrow in the front line. But then we see the second line that Manchester United have of Casemiro, Eriksen and McTominay, and they have to cover a huge amount of space here. Usually when Brighton get into a period of settled possession, they push one of their centre midfielders forward and they bring their fullbacks inside. They form this sort of 2-3 shape. And the idea there is that you're in a period of settled possession, you're going to try and get forward quite quickly, and you want to make sure that you're going to be able to defend those spaces quite well. But because Brighton know that Manchester United are going to try and block out the middle, they're going to use width instead. And so you now have this situation where, because the front line is really narrow, you get really good access into the wide areas. So Van Hecke can play the ball to Veltman, no problem, and there's a lot of space to manipulate here. Now this second line then of Eriksen, Casemiro and McTominay is now covering a huge amount of space here, right? You've got Veltman and Lamptey giving width, and then you can have either Adingra dropping in, you can have Welbeck and Lallana dropping in. We know that Brighton like to have their front line abandon the back line of the opposition and drop in deeper, and they're ending up with these overloads in the second phase. And so as a result of this, Brighton are actually in a situation where they can, within a few passes, get the ball down the field and cause problems quite quickly once they're in settled possession. So again, I've got a couple of screenshots just to show this. This is a situation that we would usually expect to see Brighton in. Again, this is from last season. So you have the two centre-backs. You can see why this is called settled possession, because there's no immediate threat on the ball. And then we've got one central midfielder here, the other one's pushed forward, and then the two fullbacks have come inside to squeeze. And it gives you access to the wide area, so this is Kara Mitoma, so you're getting width but through the wide forwards. This is very different from what it looks like in the most recent game. So now we've got Paul Van Hecke, he's the centre-back, he's in settled possession here, you can see. The two centre-backs are now much, much further apart because that makes it harder for Manchester United to manipulate them, also allows them to have access to the wide areas. But again, we can see here, the wide access now is being given through Veltman rather than the wide forward. This is Simon Adingra, who is the wide forward. He's pulled inside just again to give more access around here. And as we can see, there's the second line of Manchester United. So we've got a fullback here, we've got a fullback here. Welbeck's dropping in. We've got the other forward, Lallana, dropping in as well. So you've now got a 4v3 overload here where you've really pulled the space apart. And actually what ends up...
you can see with Eriksen almost looking across to Welbeck, spotting the space there, but knows he has to muck Veltman as well.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So actually what Brighton are able to do once they're in settled possession is to manipulate this really well. They move down the wide areas and end up getting the ball back into Welbeck, who scores. So yes, it was against the run of play, but in many respects, I think in the second phase of possession, when they're settled, Brighton were always going to cause Man United problems. The difference was in the first 20 minutes, Manchester United were able to stop Brighton from getting into these areas where they were going to cause them problems. And then after that first goal goes in, Roberto De Zerbi has a chat with the build-up unit and tells them, here's how we're going to actually stop these problems being caused by Manchester United as well. So from that point onwards, it's quite easy for Brighton because they solve the problems that Manchester United are offering them and they've scored a goal. So they're not trying to score, they're trying to control possession, and they've found a way to actually move from unsettled possession into settled possession.
Okay, so how did the game unfold after the first goal?
Well, I've already talked about how Roberto De Zerbi offered some solutions for Brighton in terms of that first phase of possession. And I think this comes down to actually centre-back positioning a lot. So again, going back to that first phase where you've got the Man United diamond like this, and the idea is the two forwards are moving between the centre-back and the centre midfielder in this way. This causes problems, obviously, as we've seen, because you end up, as we saw, with Rashford pressing on here, Fernandes on the free centre midfielder, Højlund here, and an inability for Van Hecke to get the ball back across to the other side. And so this whole structure relies on the fact that there's these straight lines between the centre-back and the centre midfielder that can be patrolled, and you can basically play 3 versus 4 and it not become a problem. But what actually we start seeing happening is that Roberto De Zerbi tells his centre-backs to move wider. Because as soon as you do that now, you've lost that straight line between the centre-back and the centre midfielder, and suddenly now you start to lose control in these forward areas. The other thing that you can do is you can push the goalkeeper in as a third centre-back. So you end up with now effectively a unit of 5 against 3.
Yeah, and still had a good game, didn't he?
Yeah, he played really well.
With the ball at his feet.
Yeah, and he's an incredible ball-playing goalkeeper, and that's the reason why they have him playing for them, because they can do this where they effectively end up with an extra player in the build-up and can overcome some of the problems that oppositions are going to try and cause them.
Talk about Van Hecke. I think I think he should be called Von Hecke, because it's, Count Von Hecke,
well,
like a sort of friend of Dracula.
The Dutch pronunciation is Von.
Von. It sounds very,
although I believe he's Belgian.
Sounds a little. Maybe it's because I'm thinking of Van Helsing, But there's something a little Dracula-y about that name. Yeah,
I guess it's the difference between a German and a Dutch pronunciation.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to talk about Dracula, but you won't let me.
Yeah, you're welcome to talk about Dracula, Joe. What do you want to?
Okay, and then after that point, it seemed as though Brighton sort of kind of just very easily won the game. They didn't have all of the chances. They didn't look, they never looked underconfident, and they scored some absolutely phenomenal goals. The Pascal Gross goal with the little feint before shooting, delightful. The João Pedro goal, the way he opens his body to score that is also incredible. Manchester United in the second half, They just got kind of worse, I think. I mean, Casemiro was substituted off the pitch at around the hour mark, and he's not had a great start to the campaign, has he? He emboldened them, I think, at the beginning of last season when they first brought him in, but it seems as though it's almost as far enough to call him a bit of a problem for them so far this season.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to control. Like we saw at the beginning, Manchester United were able to control the game, and they looked probably the better team for the first 20 minutes or so because they were causing problems to Brighton in their deep build-up. The problem is that as soon as they lost that control of the first phase of Brighton's build-up, they didn't have a huge amount left to offer. In fact, most of what they had after that was finding Rashford in these 1v1 situations with Van Hecke, where, again, Manchester United could have scored 2 or 3 goals when Rashford gets in these wide areas. We saw the Højlund goal that was disallowed, that could have, it was millimetres away from being allowed. And then we saw other situations where Rashford actually was able to gain separation in the box and have these shots where, usually you'd expect him to hit the target. But I think it is all to do with control, because as soon as you lose the ability to cause Brighton problems in these areas, they can just move through the first phase of possession into that second phase of possession. And as we said, they don't need to score a goal at this point because they're a goal up. And so, there's situations where, you're in this kind of scenario where, okay, maybe it's a bit difficult to actually generate a goal-scoring chance, but there's no reason why you then can't just move it back, recycle, retain possession, and prevent Manchester United from having the ball. So for me, the game swung on the ability of Manchester United losing control, which has been, I think, an ongoing theme this season. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact they have quite an aggressive forward press. And when that forward press is broken, or you find ways of not having that forward press cause the problems that you want it to, you're then putting a huge amount of pressure on these midfielders. Because as we've already said, like in this situation, you've got 4 players against 3 players spread out across the pitch. Premier League teams are always going to be able to manipulate those scenarios. And what we're seeing, I think, now is Manchester United's forward press is not causing the same kind of problems as it was last season. And as a result, teams are finding it much easier to move into the second phase and start, causing some of these midfielders more problems, namely Casemiro, who's in these moments where the ball is moving quickly through the thirds because the opposition have broken your front press. You've got players running at you at speed, and he is a player coming towards the end of his career. He's not as mobile as he used to be, and that's a problem.
He did a couple of things in the game as well that made me think about his age. And they were the same things, but for maybe 2 different reasons. Trying to cut the ball at source, like going for a challenge that he misses and then leaves everything behind him open. And there's a question for me in my mind about whether he is no longer physically able to do that to the same degree that he could a few years ago, and or whether he's concerned about his lack of pace, so he's trying to make early challenges so that he doesn't have to turn towards his own goal. But there were 2 or 3 instances where players quite easily got past him. And it's quite odd to think, well, I'm watching Real Madrid's Casemiro and Brighton's Lallana is just strolling past him. Yeah,
in most of the games that we'll see Manchester United play, they tend to go player for player as well in midfield situations. So I think Brighton are a bit of a unicorn in this situation, because most teams won't try and change their out of possession approach unless they're playing against Brighton. And again, I think the same thing sort of happens there. When you have these 1v1 matchups, I think you have to step in to those challenges, because the whole idea is that you're leaving space open in a bid to say, in each of these 1v1 matchups, we're going to make sure that we are going to win the duels, which is, makes sense when you've got players like McTominay, Casemiro. Mason Mount, obviously a good out-of-possession player as well. They brought in Amrabat, he'll be good in those situations. And I think sometimes some of the games we see that where it gets away from Manchester United can come when these little challenges start getting missed. So last season, the 7-0 loss to Liverpool was one of those games where they were losing each of these 1v1 battles. It becomes harder, you jump in harder, players go around you.
This is the closest you'll ever come to saying they didn't care hard enough, right?
I don't think it's necessarily about caring. I think it's just about the pressure of having to win those 1v1 duels. And I think that's
what the pundits mean, right? When they say, they're not winning their 1v1 battles, they're not going into the headers hard enough. They're losing the mental game. That's probably what they mean, right?
Yeah, and these are really tough scenarios to be in as a footballer, knowing that everyone has to win their 1v1 battles around you, and if you miss one, then you're putting your teammates in risk. And as I said before, when your front press isn't as effective as it used to be, these situations become more more exposed in these areas. So there becomes more pressure on them as well. And so again, it all just comes down to that word control.
Okay, one more thing on Manchester United. A little bit of good and then followed by some real bad. I think if Rashford and Højlund can develop a relationship where Rashford passes the ball, that might result in some goals. It was a little frustrating to watch him in this game, and I think I fully support him shooting whenever he wants to, because when he scores, nobody questions it at all. But in a game like this one, where he misses a few chances and maybe where a pass might have been the better option, that's a little frustrating to watch. But there's something to be hopeful for there. But Man United have played 5 games now. They have 6 points in the Premier League. They're 13th. They've scored 6 goals, conceded 10. I mean, are we saying they're much worse than last season? Because they don't look worse, but the results certainly are very concerning. I mean, I feel like this week is the first week where perhaps some people have started to question whether Ten Hag might go at some point. I don't mean now, but that suddenly feels like a possibility in a way that it just didn't at any point last season.
Yeah, I think it's hard to read, because I think in terms of the in-possession stuff, Manchester United have obviously improved. They've brought in players who are going to improve your in-possession play. So bringing in Andre Onana is going to make you better at build-up. And I think we've seen them. They are more consistent in getting the ball through the first phases of possession. Now, obviously, this team is riddled with injury, and then there's other players missing as well, which impacts things. But in possession as well, it's worth saying, you mentioned Rashford. I mean, Rashford, it's easy to forget that he went on those incredible streaks last season where he just, every shot he seemed to take seemed to go in.
Yeah.
And that, it played a big part in why Manchester United did so well last season. So we are going to see Rashford having to learn how to play with a number 9, because it feels like forever since Manchester United had a functional number 9. So that is something that's going to improve as well in their in-possession play. But I think, as I keep saying, like, so much of elite football at the highest level is about being able to control the game in different phases. And it feels to me like, okay, they've improved the ability to control the game in possession, and there's still more to come in that respect. But it does feel as though what's slipping here is their ability to control games out of possession. And this is what happens in the Premier League. It is a brutal league. Teams will have spent the whole summer with their analysts looking at the way that Manchester United set up out of possession and finding ways to cause them problems. And I think that's what we're seeing here. It's the inability now for Manchester United to cause as many problems out of possession as they did. And that has a knock-on effect in terms of the goal scoring as well, because Manchester United are a team who I think have generated a lot of chances through winning the ball high up the pitch. That's not happening as much as well. So not only are you a little bit more open defensively, but you're also not as dangerous as you were in an attacking sense.
And a quick word on Brighton before we finish. Brighton, 12 points from 5 games, and they're 5th at the moment, but they might as well be in the top 4. The only game they lost was against West Ham in that interesting one that we discussed. But all of their results, 3-1, 3-1, 1-3, 4-1, 4-1, and they score a lot of goals. They don't keep clean sheets, it seems, but do they presumably have a real chance of Champions League football next season, right? If they keep it up.
Yeah.
Is De Zerbi going to get found out at some point? I mean, I thought that might have happened at the beginning of this season, but maybe it's just David Moyes that knows the truth.
Well, as we just talked about, this was a game where they were found out for the first 20 minutes, and then they found this solution.
Then they unfound out.
Yeah, they were lost.
Yeah, they were Newfoundland.
That's right.
Does that work?
No. But yeah, this is the thing, is when you're coaching players, principles of build-up and being able to be flexible enough to change mid-game, then you're in a much better situation when, surprising things happen. And then it just becomes, how do we find these solutions? The centre-backs.
How do we find them? Yeah.
The centre-backs know how to play in wider configurations with a goalkeeper coming in. You prep them for that, and then once the goal's scored and you've got a bit of time to talk to your centre-backs, you can say, we know what we're doing here, let's just spread a bit wider, get your goalkeeper standing up, right?
It seems really simple when you put it like that. It's almost as though it's not a solution at all. Just go stand over there a bit, and then it's fine. Well, anyway, that's the end of today's discussion about Manchester United Brighton. But from me, from Jon Mackenzie, and from Count von Hecker, we bid you adieu. And JJ and John will be back next week with more reviewing of your favourite sport.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.